All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we are recording this to be able to send out to you afterwards. So don't worry about taking any notes or anything. But today we're hoping to discuss some of the funding buckets and requirements around that funding related to parent and family engagement, communication with family, how Talking Points can not only help you fill those requirements, but also go a step further and give you a few examples of how to use a family engagement platform in your school or district to help with your student achievement and outcomes. So I'm Jamie Paulson. I'm a former elementary educator and senior marketing manager with Talking Points. I've been in the ed tech industry for around 10 years now, and I am especially interested in finding ways to make ed tech more accessible for schools and districts, but also on the flip side of that for families and students. And that is why I'm here at Talking Points. And this is my partner, Andrew Unrein.
Hi, everyone. Andrew Unrein. I'm Director of Sales here at Talking Points. Not dissimilar backgrounds to Jamie. I spent 13 years in the classroom as a classroom teacher, and then 2 years as a building administrator. So similar to her desires and needs and wants as far as being a member of the Talking Points team, mine are similar. To lower those barriers of engagement for our families and enrich the relationships and cultures that exist between home and school and better support kids. So we're hoping to give you a path to help achieve that throughout today.
Awesome. So I think many of you may be familiar with Talking Points, but if you're not, Talking Points is a nonprofit ed tech organization that offers districts and schools and families the most accurate and relevant two-way translated communication that is out there for K-12 education. Our family engagement platform offers both human and AI-powered two-way translated communication, and it's available in 145 languages and counting. Our founder, Hee Lim, founded Talking Points based on her own personal experience growing up as a Korean immigrant student and seeing her mother make a difference in her education because she was able to. She realized that her story was not unique. There's over 40 million students here in the US growing up in underserved and immigrant communities. And there's a lot of challenges that come along with that and supporting your child in the education system if you feel overwhelmed by the school system as a whole. So she began working on a way for parents, families, and schools to connect and communicate in order for their students to achieve success. And Talking Points was created. We've remained a nonprofit organization so that we can continue to invest in the work to strengthen home and school connections.
Yeah, and it's ironic to hear about Hee-Jae's story. It's really not ironic. It just leads us into the next steps of understanding who we are and what we're about. I mean, our sole focus as an organization is to strengthen the relationships between home and school. I alluded to it earlier. The idea of what Hee-Jae went through is not dissimilar from where we are now. We're trying to make sure that we provide the best cocoon for a student to grow up in and feel supported and achieve the outcomes and desires and goals and endeavors that they have in their life. So we're always putting communication and increased engagement at the forefront of trying to build the best support system for kids. And that comes with all aspects of the school environment, not just the teacher to family connection, but all of the other elements as well, which we'll touch on as we go through presentation. But the thing that's come from that I think is something we want to point out early is the impact that we've made. So Jamie alluded to us as a nonprofit. We do have an organic product with Talking Points, and based on its efforts and our relationships with specific schools and districts, we've reached some pretty incredible numbers as an organization. 10 million students, educators, and families reached, over 400 million conversations. We're visible in all 50 states. It's amazing when you look out over the scope of the education universe, how many people are invested in the same philosophies and areas of need and growth that we are here at Talking Points.
Great. So today we're going to talk about a couple of different of those funding buckets. So we'll go through ESSA funding buckets, ESSER funding buckets, and then talk about some best practices. And then this is actually only slotted for 30 minutes. So we've got a lot of time left at the end for questions and answers. If you have any, feel free to use the Q&A function and the Zoom link, and we'll get to all of your questions at the end. Okay, so the first bucket we're going to talk about is ESSA, and I think most everyone is familiar with ESSA at this point, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was signed into law in 2015. It kind of was the next step for No Child Left Behind and gave states a little bit more flexibility in how they spend that federal funding in order to meet the guidelines for student success and achievement. And we really wanted to point out that the parent and family engagement aspect of ESSA is the only area that was kind of added and boosted up from the No Child Left Behind era, which just implies how important it really is to driving student success and achievement. The largest bucket of federal aid in that package is Title I, which gives over $7 billion annually to school districts. And of that $7 billion, the U.S. government has said that 1% of it has to be spent on money that involves the parents in the children's education. So Title I, Section 1116 is where the bulk of those parent and family engagement requirements are found. But the basic requirement summary is this. Parental involvement means the participation of parents and families in regular, two-way, and meaningful communication involving student academic learning and other school activities. So that means you can't just push out a flyer, you can't just post on the Facebook group, you can't just send an email. It has to be regular two-way communication. And not only that, but ESSA also mandates that communication with families to the full ability that you can has to be in a language that family members can understand. So I'm going to pass it over to Andrew to talk a little bit about how Talking Points meets those requirements.
Yeah, I think my big takeaway from the previous slide is the meaningful aspect of two-way communication. So at Talking Points, the meaningful validity is what we're really focused on. We know it's important to communicate about homework, to communicate about absences, to communicate about all of these pieces. But the truth is, it's all of those pieces put together that form a meaningful communicative bond between the family and the school space. That is what supports students. So at Talking Points, I have the ability as a school staff member, whether that's a counselor, a teacher, a school administrator, an attendance secretary, transportation, member of the transportation department, to engage in two-way communication with any singular member, family member in relation to a student. So I can send out a message, whatever content is necessary at that point. That family member is going to receive that message in their home language. So we've immediately kind of, I don't want to say eliminated, but addressed one of the requirements. That communication can then come back to me from the family member. They send that message in their home language and it gets translated back into English. Therefore, that two-way bond is established. Now, the unique thing about Talking Points, it's not just district and school initiated. As a family member, lowering those language bonds and providing that low tech lift to be able to communicate lets them establish a direct line of communication to the different entities that they're tied to in the school space. So they can take up the initiative to start their own conversations, to initiate feedback from a teacher, to address an issue that they might have with transportation or attendance. And so it really becomes an empowering situation for family members to be able to say, I want to help and be an active participant in that bond building relationship growing of communication between the school and home.
Perfect. So another bucket of funding we're going to talk about and that you'll find associated with ESSA is Title IV, which is a somewhat new ESSA grant program for student support and academic enrichment. It's very similar to Title I, but it's more focused on using technology to create conditions for student learning. And Title IV is composed of 2 large block grant programs, as well as discretionary grant and assistance programs that are really meant to support the needs of students and strengthen family engagement and bring schools into the 21st century, which is why sometimes you'll hear these referred to as Title IV 21st Century School grants. The way that funds are allocated to states is based on the Title I formula, and then states subgrant the funds to each district using the same formula. Part A, Subpart 1, student support and academic enrichment gains, spells out that for these funded schools, they need a parent and family engagement tool that is used to improve students' academic achievement by increasing the capacity to improve school conditions for student learning and to improve the use of technology in order to improve all of those achievements and outcomes as well. So having the ability to reach out to parents and families in order to send them resources and encourage two-way communication specific to student needs falls into this realm of support. And it's another area that Andrew can talk about how we specifically address it with talking points.
Yeah, when I hear that description, and I hear that language read, to me, it just screams equity, right? Like we want to create an equitable environment for communication to be able to reach all of our families. For, like the highlighted piece says, the idea of strengthening that relationship, and not only just for the strengthening of the relationship, but how that strong relationship again can have a positive impact on the needs and goals of every individual student. And so at Talking Points, we take that equity aspect very seriously. Our mobile application, which is one of the ways that a family can connect to us via Talking Points, provides lots of different equity and access features that are designed to support family members that may struggle with literacy, that may need things broken down into alternative languages. We provide supports for staff members to help them write for translation, knowing that once you hit a certain reading level, writing for translation becomes a little bit more difficult. And so we provide some things specifically within the platform that'll allow staff members to provide the best experience for families and for families to have the best experience in communicating back. One of the unique things that I'll call out on the screen here is we really contextualize our translation for education. So we have a specific glossary of terms that we've utilized human translators to translate those terms into specific contextualized language and then embedded that language in our platform. So for example, a term like IEP, we have contextualized for specific translation. Instead of having an acronym, and you'll see the example here in a little bit, but instead of having just the acronym, we've actually broken that translation down and made it clear for that family member receiving that communication, therefore making it a little bit easier and making it a little more accessible and easier for them to engage back with us. You'll see that kind of in the first message. So everything's about breaking down barriers. Everything's about establishing the relationship. The first message you send via Talking Points will introduce the recipient to who that message is coming from. In this case, it's coming from an elementary school teacher. It provides them a link to be able to download the mobile application. So the first message comes via text. At that point, the family member can choose whether to use the mobile app or use text. We provide text communication because it's the lowest lift for families. It meets them where they are, But we also know that the mobile application increases some equity and access features that some families may need. And then at that point, the family member can save the contact information that's come to them from the school. And then that's where that two-way balance is created, because now as a family member, I can initiate communication with someone at Bay Elementary instead of that person from Bay Elementary always having to initiate communication with me. This is what that looks like on the staff end, on the family end. We talked about literacy, we talked about language. One of the other needs that we really address is the lack of equity in technology access. So it doesn't matter whether someone has an Android or Apple cell phone, whether they have a laptop, a Chromebook, or they're using the mobile application. We provide multiple modalities and really make Talking Points accessible via all forms of technology, which is useful for, again, all families. Think about a family who is from a refugee background or they've just come to the United States. Oftentimes the cell phone is their first point of contact. We wanted to make sure that the platform and tool that we provide to schools and districts and to families is something that everyone has access to, which is, again, why we start out with text, but provide other alternatives as well.
Great, thanks. One other federal funding source to discuss is ESSER funds. So ESSER 2 funds expire September 2023, and remaining ESSER 3 funds have to be allocated by September 2024. The good news is that ESSER spending requirements really have a large range of allotment, including activities to address the unique needs of low-income children. English language learners, racial and ethnic minorities, and other high needs students. On the next slide, we've got a letter that was released by the Department of Education, the Office of Educational Technology, that came out in January that reiterated the criteria for which federal funding could be used, because there's a lot of documentation around what it can and can't, and they've put out multiple different FAQs. But in this letter, it just reiterates that federal funding can be used for the following: providing information and assistance to parents and families on how they can effectively support students, including in a distance learning environment. So Andrew is going to give us a little overview of how we fit into that as well.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see some real themes develop, right? So the terms effectively support students, providing assistance to parents and families, those things have been seen now on multiple language that's come through, whether it's ESSA, ESSA related, Title I, Title IV. So there's definitely some commonality there, and some emphasis on kind of broadening that relationship, and knowing that the broadening of the relationship is all about effectively supporting kids. And again, ultimately where our mission and vision lies as an organization. One of the ways we do that is to try and provide, we've mentioned it already, but the top quality translation support. Talking Points is not solely a translation platform. We're a family engagement platform that's designed to support kids, but translation is a big element of that. We've taken time and energy, invested time and energy and resources into making sure that we've taken that a step further than everyone else. I think the quote on the screen really articulates to me the value of us taking the time to contextualize some of that educational language and making sure that some of those things are meeting families where we need it to meet them, as opposed to just landing in their lap. This teacher alludes to the fact that in the past, she used what she had at her disposal, and it actually created some inequities in her space because families didn't understand. Now she has the confidence to know that when she reaches out to a family, that they're going to have that educational language broken down in a way that they can understand. That makes it actionable. And instead of not only lowering a barrier to engagement, we're actually promoting active engagement on their parts. It's taking a step further than what they're used to. It's why we have millions of teacher users all over the country.
Great. All right. And then you might have wondered why we didn't talk about or mention Title III when we talked about those ESSA buckets above. But Title III funding is important, but it's a little bit more limited in your expenditure options. So Title III specifically addresses funding tied to programs to increase English proficiency and academic achievement of English language learners. But there's also one other requirement, which is providing and implementing effective activities and strategies that enhance or supplement language instruction educational programs that have to include parent, family, and community engagement activities. So Talking Points fits this bucket, not only because we have some causal research showing that we've improved the academic achievement of English language learners. The only thing that we always advocate for schools and districts in utilization of Talking Points for ELL learners, though, is equity. We want to make sure that we are providing equity across the board and making sure that all students have what they need. So I'm going to turn it back over to Andrew to talk a little bit about Title III and then some best practices that we found.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my only, not to necessarily reiterate what Jamie just said about Title III, but it's very easy when you identify the strength that we have as a translation platform to identify EL as the population that you want to serve with a platform such as Talking Points. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But to her point, in order to create an equitable solution for all, the idea is that not only are we solutioning for EL, but we're solutioning for all students. We talked about literacy needs before. We talked about technology lift before. Those things are not independent to EL populations. Each of your districts also have populations of families that don't have students in the EL program, but might have language needs in their home. We meet those needs as well. So really encompassing the whole concept of family engagement and what that can mean for outcomes for all students is what we promote at Talking Points. That being said, we also know that there are a lot of people in attendance who are Title III folks who are curious about how we fill that need. So we didn't want to ignore it. One of the things that's relevant for all of these different funding streams, and really even any alternative themes, and I'll kind of stop there for a second. One of the things that I would encourage all of you to do, and you'll get some information about this at the end, is that we have account executives and teams here at Talking Points that are willing and able to help assist you in finding alternative avenues of funding outside of the buckets that are mentioned here. They might be state specific. They might relate to a specific organization. It could be a grant that exists. We're happy to help partner with you in trying to find those things. But no matter what funding stream or source you look at, analytical data and data to back up the use of your platform is going to be needed in the application process and in the renewal of the application process. So at Talking Points, we provide a full analytics dashboard. You have one simple screenshot here that just kind of gives you a glimpse behind the curtain. But that analytics dashboard is designed for you to be able to see at what length is the tool being used at an individual teacher level, at a school-based level, across the district. That's great public information that could be shared out in a positive light to show what kind of impacts are happening within the school culture, the school environment. It's great information as a professional to be able to use in professional conversations with my managers, my superiors, and whatever hierarchy or structure you might find yourself in within your district or your school. And then we use that information to create action items, right? So if I'm seeing certain teachers having a ton of success using the platform, or certain schools seeing a ton of success using the platform, we want to scale that success and find ways to make impacts on more students than what we're impacting at that point. And then I think the last step is, once we've achieved kind of that universal efficacy, then we can really talk about what are the outcomes and goals that we want to enable Talking Points to support us with, right? What is that impact going to lead to? I think the next two slides kind of call that out. So we participated in a study with WestEd a couple of years back, and what we found is that Talking Points made an immediate impact with non-English speaking families. 100% of them felt like they were more involved. Teachers felt like they were able to reach 98% of families that they weren't able to reach before. I think that number is astounding. You talk about a time period where staff members are leaving the profession at high rates. There's a lot of reasons why they're doing that. A lack of support is generally one of those. So to be able to connect equitably with family members is a way for me to boost that support system that I need to do my job effectively. And therefore, the hope would be making my job not necessarily easier, but a little more enriching. And then lastly, and it kind of goes into our next slide as well, we've seen some really positive response and then reduced absenteeism, reduced suspension and positive behavior, and even some increases in graduation rates. We just completed, as an organization a few months back, a causal study with a large urban school district, roughly 30,000 students, where we saw some very specific gains that happened in that school space during their use of Talking Points. Talking Points was the vehicle that helped bridge that gap of communication and family engagement and those tighter bonds of relationship. We saw some results that really went hand in hand with that, including some gains in academic performances and a decrease in absenteeism rate. A lot of you here are tied to dollars and cents. You have budgets. You're trying to make financial decisions. The reality is, if you can implement a support tool that targets things like enrollment, that targets decreasing absenteeism, those things are often tied directly to your state funding formulas. And we believe as an organization that the ROI of implementing a tool that creates those relationship bonds, that tightens the relationship between home and school, that leads to increased graduation rates, that can help with your enrollment processes, that can decrease absenteeism, can really demonstrate a return on investment that you can use when it comes time for budgets to fall out for the next year. Talking Points is a very minimal expense in order to achieve the kind of ROI. It's very unique in that capacity. And then I love a good testimonial, love a good anecdote. I love this quote from Kirsten. Just the fact that her EL families have an option of messaging via text. We talked about the tech lift before. This to me goes back into playing the equity feature again. I have 5 kids, 2 different school districts, 5 different schools. parceling through all of their emails is a maddening activity. When I receive something from either district via text, it gets my immediate attention and my immediate energy, and then I evaluate it as such. So I love that our teachers love that we have that feature. I love that our families love that we have that feature, that they don't have to go to an alternative application in order to have that communication. And again, it proceeds and kind of hits home with our mission and vision of trying to make things equitable and accessible. And then what I'd like to do here, so we have a little bit of time left. We're going to hit real briefly on just a few things in the platform that we think people would appreciate, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So we talked a little bit about the equity and access features before. This is just a highlight of that. You see the highlighted IEP example in the screenshot. We take the time to contextualize some of that educational terminology. So you go back to all the things that we saw repeated throughout the title language, strengthening relationships, enhancing communication. This is one of the ways in which we do that. We contextualize those educational terms, put them in translated language influenced by our human translators to make it understandable for the recipient, and again, make them feel empowered, and not make them feel empowered, but empowered their ability to engage and continue to communicate with the staff personnel. That comes through in text-to-speech, speech-to-text, our human translator support, support for translated video captioning. As a staff member, I can record a video, send it out. We will caption that video in the translated home language of the recipient. Lots of things to enhance that communication aspect and therefore strengthen the relationship bonds that exist between school and home. Here's some simple screenshots of different types of communication and messages that have gone out via the platform. Here's the IEP example I was alluding to before. So in English, you're seeing the message at the top. I'm sending you a message to schedule a meeting to review Antonio's IEP. There's the machine version of that translation where IEP is not translated. It just comes through as an acronym. Then you see the talking points translation where we've taken the time to contextualize that translation, translate the acronym itself. That's embedded in the platform. So now as a staff member, if I use the acronym IEP, you'll get that specific contextualized translation in your language, which again is powerful for the family. Oops, excuse me. Here's another instance of communication. You see some of the simple logistical communication that can take place with talking points that can have a huge impact. Like I might find out that a student is out sick. That's great information for me to know as a staff member, but it also sets me up to follow up and help that student achieve success for the time that they're gone. In this conversation, it ended up being a little bit more in depth about what that student is going through. How valuable is that information for the staff member to be able to use when that student comes back, to understand just where that student's situation might be. We have check-ins about academics that take place all the time, where it's a follow-up. Student might be telling me this, or they're struggling with that. How can I seek supports for them? And the parent or the family member has access to that staff member to initiate that conversation. It's so much more powerful than relying on a staff member to say, hey, it's Friday afternoon. I need to make my calls about who's struggling in my class. Well, maybe this family member identified the fact that their student was struggling 3 days ago, and they can initiate that conversation. And so a plan of action and attack takes place much sooner, and maybe with a little bit more depth. And then the school, we haven't really talked about it much, but the school has tons of different touch points for families, right? I said counselors earlier, attendance secretaries, transportation, food service, school administrators. Elementary school students have one teacher all day, but they also have 4 or 5 potential specialist courses throughout the day. We provide avenues for all those rostered and non-rostered staffs to have connection to families, so that the family members don't feel just connected at the teacher to family level, but at the school to family level, which makes them feel, again, like they have a true partnership and not just a one-to-one relationship with the teacher environment. And then again, this is just basically the same type of information, but you see the translated content that goes into it. And as you build those stronger bonds, you start to see people expecting that communication via talking points, to use it to answer their general questions, to get excited about enrolling for the next year. Those are some of the outcomes that can organically happen when you incorporate a tool that's successful in raising engagement levels. So where does that leave us? We're running up on Q&A time, which is perfect. What we'd like to do is make everyone that's on this call aware that we're extending a special offer from now through the end of the school year. Anyone that would love to potentially add Talking Points as a support system for the 23-24 school year. We're offering early and immediate access at no cost to those partners from now through the end of June. What does that allow me to do? As a staff member, it allows me to focus on what's going to be my implementation plan for next year, training my staff, getting my rostering and technology rollout out of the way now, knowing that when the school year starts next year, we can hit the ground running, have everything in place and at a point where we're all ready to succeed. A lot of times those decisions don't get made until after the new year rolls over, at least the actual purchases are concerned. And sometimes that can push that timeline back. We're offering this as a way to springboard everyone into a successful rollout for next year. Visit the website, talkingpoints.org/schools for more information. We have account executives that are skilled in who we are as a team and as an organization and what powers we provide. But then also that funding aspect. So if you're looking for insight in there, those AEs can help sort through that aspect for you as well. And I think, Jamie, we had one question in the chat that I answered. I don't know if you've been checking it or not.
I do have a couple more, and just as a follow-up to this, we will be sending out the deck and the recording and a companion guide for this, which is basically just going to be kind of a cheat sheet and some relevant information on, okay, which bucket of funding said this and which bucket of funding does this fit under, just to help you out a little bit with your paperwork or reporting. Do you have a couple of questions? One of which is the research available for review, and where can we find that information? All of our research is on our website, so that talkingpoints.org/research. It's all going to be on there. So you'll find the West Ed study that Andrew mentioned, and then also our newest study, the causal study, is on there. Or if you want to have like a really in-depth conversation about it, as Andrew mentioned earlier, to reach out to an account executive. We have multiple internal teams that can walk through all of the research, all of the paperwork. They are amazing at helping to understand, facilitate, guide conversations. So that was one of them. Additionally, part of the reason that it's special to be a nonprofit in this space is that we're able to use a lot of funding to promote research and development on things that other organizations aren't really looking at, like what does impact attendance. We've got a couple of webinars coming up that focus specifically on the research, so I'll send out an invite for those afterwards as well, on some cool stuff that we're doing that is really groundbreaking. So the other one,
Can I dive into that? Can I dive into that next question?
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. It's perfect timing, because as I was reading the other question, what are the metrics within family engagement analytics? The topic of the webinar for next week is literally taking the analysis of our conversations to a little bit deeper level. And that's a focus of the organization, is to not only understand the metrics we have now. So I will answer the actual question. The metrics we have now is we can tell you the breakdowns of individual messaging, meaning like one-to-one communication versus announcements for every teacher, every school member, or excuse me, every staff member in a school. We can tell you which families at the school level are most communicated back. So they've received X number of messages. How often are they engaging back? We can do that at the school level, the district level, and even the teacher level. You have full conversation as a district partner or a school partner. You have full access to conversation history for all of your staff members and all the family communications, including the translations that have gone on there as well. So really, like I alluded to earlier, not only does it tell me where we're seeing success and where we're seeing great implementation, but it can identify those areas where we might be able to find our champions and use those champions to influence the efforts of folks who haven't seen the benefit of the platform yet. And in some cases, not only from a staff member perspective, but from a family perspective. If I'm trying to get the most out of that engagement aspect in my school community, if I have several families that have gone above and beyond to engage with the school, what's causing that to happen? What are the things that they're receiving, or the things that they're focused on when they're engaging, and then try to scale that. How does that play into next week's webinar? That's really kind of what the topic is about us continuing to uncover and identify what those things are, and then use that information to inform all of our partners. so that they can rely on it as not only one-off success in one unique situation, but again, we talked about scaling, to be able to scale solutions, right? To say, this is where we've seen the greatest amount of growth. This is where we've seen impact. This is how that impact has manifested over time with certain partners, and then allow people to be able to capitalize off of that. So.
Great. And then one other question that we had, Andrew, was so parents don't have to download or do any type of setup work?
No, Talking Points is zero lift for families. As long as your student information system has the cell phone contact numbers for the family members as part of the student record. The rostering process with Talking Points, we identify the appropriate fields from your SIS. We use either some intermediaries or direct SFTP connection to transition that data to our platform. The first message goes out from the staff member. It'll look just like what I had in the screen share. It'll introduce the staff member. It'll provide them the option to download the mobile application. But at that point, that line of communication is wide open. And as a family member, once I've saved that contact, I don't have to wait for the staff member to communicate with me. I have the ability to initiate communication anytime I want. Zero lift for them.
Great. Okay. I think that's
Good
all.
Questions.
Yeah, those were awesome. Information about how to fund will be sent to participants afterwards. So just to reiterate that, we will be sending a follow-up email, including the recording, the deck, a companion guide, and invitation for a future webinar focused on research. But the more important thing is, if you do have any additional questions, or if you want to talk to an account executive or impact solutions team just one-on-one to see what's available, or you have specific types of funding that are state specific, maybe not even federal funding, feel free to reach out to us.
I would just add to that point, we've had a couple districts as of late that have recognized either some state level grants, or even in one case, kind of a little bit of a community related grant that they've used to champion Talking Points, at least for this initial year. I think what we tend to find is that first year funding is always the most difficult, but people find the ROI out of the gate to be pretty tremendous. And then it just becomes part of who they are moving forward. Our renewal rates are super high for that reason. Just the return on investment is really, really high. So happy to help you find those year one buckets, or attempt to help you find them.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for attending, and you'll be receiving a follow-up information email from us soon, but happy Friday and happy St. Patrick's Day, and see you soon.
Take care, everyone.